Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today, I have the pleasure of Faris Aranki. Good to see you, Faris.
Good to see you too, Julian. Real pleasure to be with you today.
Yes, good. You are the founder and CEO of Sheerghetto Consulting, an innovative consulting firm supporting businesses and individuals to improve their strategic focus and EQ. And you help sharpen companies' effectiveness through the formula of success equals IQ times EQ times FQ, which made that, we'll come into conversation about that later. And today we're going to be exploring how to get the best out of your team. But before we go there, Faris, what do you love about what you do?
I love loads of things about what I do, Julian. Not only being on podcasts to talk about it, but more specifically, it is around that effectiveness part. It is about helping teams be better after I work with them than they were before I worked with them, about how they come together, how they work together. And it's kind of like that epiphany moment. I actually started my career as a school teacher, and in many ways, it was very similar to the first time you see a child learn something and you realize their life is going to be different from that point onwards. And that's the same feeling I get when I work with teams and companies, and you see that aha moment. And that's what I really, really enjoy.
When did you have that moment for your business that you realized this is what you love doing in terms of helping companies, helping teams to get those aha moments, to get those moments where they become even more effective than they are now?
Well, I'd always had that, but I hadn't focused solely on it, right? I would only get that aha moment if my career before I started, what I was doing before I started my own company was more of a classic strategy consulting role, where 90% of the work was actually doing analysis and coming to answers and finding solution. And then at the end, you'd present them and you might get an aha moment. But actually, most times I didn't get an aha moment because most people looked at the content and went, no, I don't get it, or we're not going to do that. And that's when I realized, do you know what? I enjoy that final bit and actually getting people to coalesce around an idea, get them excited around it, get them to be honest with each other what they thought about it. So why not just focus on that part? And that's what I set a business up to do.
Fantastic. And today we're going to be exploring how we can get the best out of our teams. And I think what I'd like to almost start with really is how do we know what is the best for our teams? And when we talk about the best and the high performance and everything else, how do we know what we're aiming for? How do we know what we're going to create is going to be the best for the team we have or the organization we currently have?
Yeah, great question. And that, because that could be how long is a piece of string. Really, for me, success and the best for a team can only come from the team being really clear on what they're trying to achieve. And that's got to come from the team. So this isn't some theoretical exercise about the perfect team, talks in this way, does this. It's about do they achieve their goals, yes or no? And so often teams don't even start there. They don't have a clear goal. Now, I'm an avid fan of your podcast, and I know you have people on, high performance people. And the one thing they all have in common is they have very, very clear goals. And it doesn't matter what those goals are. It could be just, we all want to just turn up to work on time. We all just want to leave by 5. Okay, great. As long as you all are clear about that, let's make sure you do that in the most effective way. So performance is measured against your goals, really. It's as simple as that, but it sounds simple, but many teams don't have it agreement, don't have it written down, don't have it in mind. So we often start there when we work with them.
Interestingly, I've been on a bit of a journey with goals. I've got less concerned with outcomes so much and more concerned about the process. And I just sometimes we get, I don't know, do you think sometimes goals can be not a negative impact, but if we're not achieving them or they're too stretched or they're imposed upon us, are not always an effective way of controlling the sort of direction of travel for success? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a goal, goals can have unintended consequences, for sure. There's so many famous stories out there about, you went out to measure one thing and it caused this knock-on effect. And so you've got to be careful of that. And I think being too beholden to something too specific it's going to make it more difficult. And you're going to beat yourself up more. So what do I mean by that is, it's one thing saying I want to become a footballer, Okay, or yeah, but it's another thing saying I want to specifically become Lionel Messi. I want to play for Barcelona. I want to. So the more specific you make it, great. You'll read all the books say make it as specific as possible, but you are giving yourself a very hard stick to beat yourself up with, and you will push too hard. So often what I do with goal setting is not to be so overly specific and to be sort of go up a level. What are you trying to achieve as an objective rather than a specific number? And that might be what is a feeling that you want. What is an ideal of how you work together? So yeah, it's a real difficult balance. It's more an art than a science, setting goals, I think, nowadays. Whereas previously we were always told it's a science.
Yeah, I think it's been very much, let's set smart goals and be very specific about it so you can measure them and know you're going to achieve them and everything else. And I get that. And it's important to have some sort of milestones along the way. But also, as you say, is to almost have the ability to reevaluate and change things. How do you sort of play that into, you talk about taking it up a level goals. Is that sort of taking it more like to purpose and mission and vision? Is it that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it is. And I think these things always brought best to life. Let me tell you a short story about one of my clients that I was working with. So I walked in and I said to them, what is your, what are you aiming for as a team? And this is the senior leadership team. And they said, oh, well, we've got a clear vision. It's on our website. Here's the thing. And I read it and it was all about, we want to be, we want to help human society be race into space, environmental work. They're an engineering firm. And I said, okay, great. Now let's have a look at all the work you've done in the last 3 years. And I looked at the collection of work they've done. It was just a random collection of projects that they seem to have picked up through one means. And none of them were even remotely focused on what they had written as their vision. And I said, okay, help me out here. Either your vision is wrong, okay, or you're really bad at getting projects that link to your vision. And after a bit of silence around the room, one of the guys went, do you know what? I'll be honest with you. I'm just here to make money. And someone else, another of the directors said, that's why I'm also in as well. I just felt we had to make something up to make it seem appealing to the outside world. And I said, look, and it went around this room and it was like a wave, and the four directors all agreed and said, that's really why I'm in it. And I said, look, okay, maybe not that brutally honest to your customers, but isn't it a relief that you all now can be honest with each other, which you've never been before? Isn't this going to, A, make it easier to have honest conversations, but B, make it easier to chase work because more things now fall under that umbrella. And it was like a weight had been taken off their shoulders. So when I say, yeah, we do a lot in vision and strategy and mission, but it doesn't have to always be aim for the moon. It can be something that just a bunch of guys or people in a room go, that's what I really want to do in life.
But as you say, it's that important thing of everybody being aligned to it, isn't it? As they all agreed and realised, they realised what they were shooting for really, but actually they'd shared it, and there's that sense of transparency and openness, isn't it, in terms of being aware of it as a team.
Oh yeah, completely. Because it's like a sliding doors moment. Even a slight change in focus will mean so many different consequences coming out of the back of it, from what work do you chase, what customers you attract, what your employees think they should be working on. So yeah, having that alignment and honesty and being able to articulate it, super, super important.
So with all your experience over the last number of years where you've sort of done a lot of consultancy, a lot of strategy work with organizations and teams,
yeah.
What have you found the sort of, I guess, the key problems or obstacles that stops teams becoming the best they can be? We've just talked a bit about goal setting, but what else have you found that gets in the way of that high performance?
Well, if you think about the equation that we use at Sheergetto, which is success equals IQ times EQ times FQ, what we find are barriers are companies tend to over-index, and I'd say more often than not, they go, we'll just go with IQ, we'll go with really good ideas. But they don't think so much about the EQ, which is taking others on the journey with them on those ideas, or the FQ, which is focusing to be able to deliver on your ideas. Now, let's take the second one. Too many people that I meet, even at senior levels, are focused on what I call broadcast. Do I get my message out? They don't focus on, is the message absorbed? So they'll talk in the way that they like to talk. They'll use language, they'll use jargon, they'll assume people get it because they get it. They don't make any special effort. And that's a barrier because people, unless there's a safe environment, will just nod their head, particularly to a boss, and say, yeah, okay, I get it, I agree with it. But they don't. And that's where these micro fissures begin, and they get bigger and bigger. It's like having a rip in a spacesuit, I call it. As soon as the rip, we've all seen space movies. The last thing the hero wants is a rip in the spacesuit because it's going to end badly, right? And that's what happens. But they often very blind to it. So I see that happening a lot. And then the other part is the FQ, right? And this is the focus to deliver. And the biggest challenge here is too many companies, too many businesses, even individuals are trying to do too much. It never fails to amaze me how many strategic, important projects a company thinks it can handle at the same time, and each extra one you take on means you're not doing the other ones as well as you could do.
And just going into that a bit more on the FQ side of things. So when you've got this, clarity of purpose, mission, whatever the organization wants to use, and they get the sort of alignment of goals, how do they get to a place where they get that real focus and make sure that they're aligned when they think everything is going to make the money, if that's the sort of their purpose? Everything's going to hit the vision, and also the conflict in a team. Sometimes when there's a leader who's trying to decide, but actually in the team there's a bit of conflict on what the priorities are based on either just interest, appetite for it, whatever it may be, the project. So how do we sort of resolve that in terms of and create that real focus with the team?
So, I mean, in my eyes, you've got to create an environment that everyone is included and feels they can speak. First of all, there's a lot of teams, a lot of cultures where the boss dictates and leads by fear, even if they don't mean it. So make sure everyone has an equal voice, and then or their voice is heard, not necessarily equal. But then make sure everyone is assessing things on the same bit of fact, right, and the same basis. So what is the criteria we're using? I can tell you loads of stories where I walk in and people will argue passionately for one thing because they're only looking at it from a very small lens or one way of looking at it, and it's not necessary. So make sure everyone is looking and assessing and has that data and those facts to hand, and then you've got to force you've got to make it aware that yes, these could all contribute, but which ones are moving the dial more? Which ones are really making the difference? Because surely it's better to do all those and do them really well than try and do everything or do a bigger section of things that aren't delivering as much benefit, but you're doing more of them to give you comfort. But that's a really hard mindset to sometimes switch to, particularly letting go of stuff.
I was going to say it's that letting go of projects, isn't it? Where you're thinking actually this is quite good, but I'm actually going to lay it down. That's hard, isn't it?
It's really hard, particularly if you came up with the idea, your ownership, you've developed it, or you've spent a considerable amount of time bringing it to where it is. That's really hard. That's like I remember as a junior consultant spending hours, in the office till 4 a.m. polishing a bunch of slides, handing it to my boss who went, yeah, the project's moved on, so we're not going to use that anymore, and you're like, and he's like, so, and you have to emotionally bounce back from that thing and throw yourself into the next piece of work. And that happened time and time again. But, and so you've got to be aware of that, the emotions of giving up projects and stuff. And one of my favorite things to do is help teams look at things from a different angle. And a common technique, if a company works for me, is something like, did you ever used to play the game Top Trumps, Julian?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. You and I are of an age, and I know my nephews and stuff still play this. So I'll often turn a bunch of projects into Top Trumps, and I'll get them laminated. I'll take them into the boardroom, and we'll spend 2 hours playing Top Trumps. Okay, fantastic. Using their data, and it's amazing when you keep playing a game and cards keep losing constantly. People go, well, why is this? This terrible card? Why is it in my deck? I'm like, I don't know. It's your project, right? It's your data telling me that it's, and they go, well, we can get rid of that one. We'll get rid of that one. So just reframing it and changing how they associate with it is a great way to get people to put a bit of distance and hand off things that they might otherwise have wrapped their arms around and said, no, I'm not budging.
I really like that idea of top trumping everything, putting it into little cards and putting all the facts and then playing the game. I think that's a fantastic way of getting that perspective, because then you start, as you say, you start realizing, why is that card in this game? It should be out.
Yeah. And this is a common theme when people work with us. We, as I alluded to earlier, I started as a school teacher, so I have about 1,001 games that I was taught to try and help children engage with learning. And I found repurposing them in the boardroom or with senior teams is just as useful, because it's all about that reframing and changing the emotions around things. Or so often I'll get senior executives to stand up and do some kung fu together, to play top trumps, to do things, and they'll look at me and go, "Why are we about to do this?" And I'll say, "Trust me, it's to let go of something or change how you look at it, or even just see your colleagues in a different light, which can often create the breakthrough in an impasse that otherwise would just have us sitting around debating for hours."
Yeah, and as I say, just physically moving people around can do something, can't it? In terms of either a different location or a different space in the room, can actually start to see something in a different place, because you just got that physical movement and it changes your perspective. You said something about making sure that in terms of in a team, making sure that people's voice is heard. How do we create an environment where people feel that their voice is heard, but also they feel they can share things? So that initial thing of physically I can share this, but also I'm heard actually in what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give two examples that I love doing with teams. So number one, I unashamedly borrowed from the likes of Amazon, which is the pre-read. So nowadays, any meeting, which particularly if it's a decision meeting or a sharing of views meeting, I will get teams to share their views ahead of the meeting, and they'll submit them all into me. I will then anonymize their views and circulate that as a document, so that everybody has to read everyone else's view and they don't know who belongs to who. Okay, and I did this once with a team where they had one member of the team who was a very quiet, introverted, very physically small, petite lady, who the rest of the team never, ever talked to her or asked her opinion in a meeting. And when we put her opinions on paper and people began to read them, they realized that she actually had one of the best opinions in the room. She was, statistically, when I looked at the data, she was more right than wrong of anyone in the team when it came to making big decisions. And what was fascinating is they all read this document, and we always, after the pre-read, we have a clarification moment, so anyone can ask any questions. And somebody raised their hand and said, "Is that John's opinion? That one that's," and I went, "No." He went, "Is it Steve's?" And I went, "No." He went, "Is it Paul?" And he literally went through every member of the team, and the one person he couldn't think of was the lady he never thought to ask. And I said, "No, it's actually Jane's opinion." And he goes, "Oh, that's amazing." Right? And week in, week out, not only did they begin to realize the value that Jane brought to the team, but she grew in confidence, and and she felt.
So that process actually helped her to start to be more verbalize things in a meeting as well.
It did, because in that clarification, I said, "Well, Jane, can you now explain your view?" So give her a platform to speak, and a legitimacy, which she never felt. She felt she was never invited to the table, so she would just stay quiet. So that was it, and so nowadays I do this straight out the bat with every team, because there is always some sort of politics or hierarchy, even in great cultures. It doesn't hurt to do this technique, and get them used to it. So that's one way to create that legitimacy. The other story I often tell is I once worked with a team of super alpha, super driven individuals, of different sexes, different cultures. And the one thing they all had in common is they did not see each other as a team. They saw actually the other people in their team as a burden, and they didn't really want to interact with each other, because they were they were all traders, they were all making very big decisions in the market, and they had a lot of feedback from their financials that they were doing very well. But they needed to work together, and so I needed to make this happen. And so I played to their strengths or their interests, which was winning. So the start of every meeting, I would do a quick game, and the game would be, let's guess how many X we have as a team, and every member of the team had to bet £10 of their money.
Real money.
Real money. Right. So it'd be like week one, let's guess how many pets we all have as a team. Okay. And so each of these traders would put in £10 of their money, and they'd sit there and go, I think we've got 8, because I know that Julian has a dog, and I know that. And so they placed their bets. And this was the beauty of the activity. I didn't care if they were right. The real point of the activity is we then had to go round and everyone had to talk about their pets and their life and reveal a bit about themselves. And that takes 5-10 minutes. And you know what happens? You do that 4 weeks in a row, people start learning about each other. They start unprompted asking each other, how's your dog? How's your son that you told us about last week? So it created the consequence that I wanted, whereas they thought they were playing a game and they got really fired up by, I won this week. Haha, you lost this week. But actually there was a hidden way of getting them to work as a team. And fast forward, 3 months later, quite a different atmosphere when you go into meetings.
And was that almost ties in with a little bit of EQ as well, isn't it? Get a bit more people orientated, get a little bit more aware of others, but also yourself. What else can we do in terms of, and that's a great example with that sort of super alpha teams that can help, I suppose, almost dial that EQ up within a team, and use the team to sort of help you create that.
Yeah, just look at, anytime two human beings find something they have in common, they're more likely to work better together. So create little ways. I call them lightning rods and speed bumps. So lightning rods are things that bring, focus all the lightning in the room. Or speed bumps are things that slow everyone's thinking down, so they have to consciously think about things and each other. Mm-hmm. So the more of those you can put in, and these don't have to take time, you can just put them in as general parts of meetings. Okay, there's lots of little techniques. Use more breakouts, use more one-on-ones. Okay, instead of you just shouting out what your opinion is, just turn to the person next to you, share your opinion, the two of you agree on the opinion, then share it back into the group. Little ways we change how we interact as a team. That can suddenly increase that inclusivity and get teams working better together.
And going back to the doing the pre-read, where you sort of anonymized everything in terms of people's opinions, and then that created a revelation that somebody was creating some amazing opinions and actually was the one who was the quietest throughout the group. Did that team, or do you expect teams to continue in that sort of vein in trying to create that sort of getting people to share their thoughts, or once you get to a place where actually that confidence in that lady, she started to share anyway in the team?
Yeah, you see people evolve, and if you're really lucky, you'll get a champion in the team who continues to not just maintain the techniques that you've put in place, but look for other ones. But often that's all it takes is get them humming. And often what I do is I'll work with the team for a few months, I'll step away, but then I'll check in a year later and see how they progress, because they can either slip back to old ways, or new team members come and they with them they bring new challenges. So it's not something you just do once and get comfortable with, because we all continue to change and we all continue to adapt.
And obviously now we're getting more into this sort of hybrid working, remote working in the office, all over the place. And there obviously got the physicality challenges comes with that in terms of communication as well, and in terms of reading people well. What are your thoughts on trying to create those sort of best teams performance in that sort of hybrid world? In terms of, I'm sure you've been working with hybrid teams.
Yeah, I think they, I kind of poo-poo people who tell me that you cannot achieve in a hybrid team what you can or in a remote team what you can in person. And I said, well, you can. It just requires actual thought. You cannot try and retrofit what you do in an environment into the online world. You have to start with a blank piece of paper. Mm-hmm. Now, admittedly, hybrid working is probably the hardest. So when you have a group of individuals all together in one room, but the other half spread out and they're joining remotely, that is probably the hardest combination, because you've got to do. But as with any of these things, I always say, think about the lowest common denominator. Think about the person who is the least advantaged on that call. So usually in a hybrid environment, it's somebody who's sitting remotely, who's probably got the worst Wi-Fi in the team. So I said, so plan the meeting for them. Assume their Wi-Fi will go down, right? So have a backup way to connect them. Assume they won't be able to interject. So give them a room buddy. So someone they can WhatsApp instantly when they've lost the flow of the room, or they feel like they can't chip in. And maybe pair them with someone who is a bit more confident than them, who's in the room, right? Give them all the notes before the meeting. right? So just change how you design the session, and you can get the best, and you can overcome all these barriers. But if you just try and retrofit it or ram it, it's going to be a car crash.
I mean, this all goes back to, doesn't it, is how we, if you go to a meeting, what's the goal of the meeting, what we're trying to achieve, what's the purpose of that meeting, and then almost working back, what's the best way of going about that. And I think, what I've heard from you in terms of all your examples, and obviously you're coming in from a consultancy perspective when you go into these organizations, but actually it's just trying to change the ways of working, thinking differently, acting differently, that then impact behaviors, then impacts, open up channels of communications and certainly opportunities, but also creates that gelling of the team, isn't it? And this is what, mixing things up, it does, doesn't it? Have you found that in terms of your experience as you start to go in there and start to create these different ways of working, apart from it being he's a consultant, he will do that, but actually has started to create that sort of momentum and start to see then that high performance come through?
100%. It absolutely makes a difference. And, and so many times I see the benefits that it delivers. And I often say to a company, like, if I could fix this for you, how great would that be? And I'll tell you a story in just a second, exactly around this situation. But someone like me, yes, I'm a consultant, but me and my team and the people I work with, the way we go about it, I am thinking about the level of detail of how do we set, who's sitting next to who in a meeting? What language do I use for each person in that meeting? Like you said, should we even have this meeting? Where should it be? What temperature should the room be? What snacks should we provide to get the best out of people? This is the level of detail to change how teams work and get the best out of people. Now, because in my eyes, it can be immensely powerful. And the story I was about to tell you was, one of my clients came to me with a problem that they tried to solve by changing processes, introducing technology, but they'd never thought about just fixing how the team worked. Because they had a group, two different business units in the company that just had a difficult conversation every month. And it didn't go well. And their solution was to, like I say, invest in technology and all these things, rather than invest in those two groups and say, how can we get these two to have a better conversation, which will save us literally hundreds of millions of dollars each year? I was introduced to them, and I worked with these two teams, and lo and behold, by just getting them talking to each other better, it resolved most of the problem overnight. And they were like, "That is unbelievable." And I said, "Well, often we don't think of the simplest solutions, which is people."
Yes, but it takes sometimes an external perspective on it to see it, because we can't always see it when we're in it. And when I'm coaching my clients, whether it's a team or an individual, it takes somebody externally to come and bring that challenge and almost hold that mirror up to almost go, because we all step into it, and we all need that external, and you need it as well. We all need that from other people to challenge our thinking. We all get caught up in little sort of grooves in our lives and little patterns which we think are really helping us, and we're not realizing actually that's not helping us anymore. We need to have a new pattern, a new groove, and keep being agile, more flexible. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Faris, and I could keep asking for many examples of how you change your team and just write them all down, because I think they're really brilliant ideas. So if people want to connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing it?
I think the two best ways, far and wide, are number one, through the company website, which is shiagetto.com, and Shiagetto is SHIAGETO. Otherwise, I spend a disproportionately large amount of time on LinkedIn, so people can look me up, Faris Aranki, and we'll carry on the conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Faris. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Julian.